to welcome you all here. And as I mentioned earlier, we're going to have quite a few people walking in later this morning. We have several things going on at one time. We have an art exhibit that's being provided by Ignacio Gomez. That'll occur next door in the Hacienda room. We also have the Chicano Studies Research Center publications available there for those of you that want to see a series of publications that go back to 1969. In addition to that, we'll have the symposium in here. Later in the day, at around 5:30, oh, I'm back on. At around 5:30, we're going to be moving to the Fowler Museum for the screening of the HBO film Blowouts. And we'll have Moctezuma Esparza there to introduce the film. And of course, we'll have Sal Castro to make his comments at the end of the film this evening. So if you can hang on until about 9:30 tonight. 9:30 tonight. All right. My name is Carlos Haro. I'm the Assistant Director of the Chicano Studies Research Center, and I want to welcome you all here. This is now one of a series of conferences that the center has put on during the last 5 years, significant conferences. The first one in 2003 that we implemented dealt with the murders at Juarez, and the title of that conference was the Maquiladora Murders, or Who is Killing the Women of Juarez. That conference was coordinated by Professor Alicia Gaspar de Alba, who recently received an award for her novel Desert Blood. In 2004, we offered the conference Mendez versus Westminster School District, Paving the Way for School Desegregation, and that dealt with the 1946-47 school desegregation case, in which the state of California schools were desegregated. And of course, Mendez dealt with Mexican schools, but that desegregation case affected all schools in the state of California. And it was a precursor to Brown versus the Board of Education. That conference was co-coordinated by Nadine Bermudez, who was a graduate student in the School of Education, and Professor Daniel Solorzano in the audience today was involved in implementing that conference. In 2005, we presented the Sleepy Lagoon case, constitutional rights and the struggle for democracy, and that conference was held not only to deal with what occurred in 1943, the racial profiling of students, of young men in the 40s during the war hysteria of World War II, but also to connect that with what's happening today and the infringement of our civil rights during this war on terrorism. In March of this year, we hosted the Latino Education Summit, falling through the cracks, a critical view of the transitions that are occurring in the education of Latino students. And that conference was coordinated by Professor Daniel Solorzano. We had a rather sizable crowd here that day, and in addition, for those of you that are here, fortunately, you'll be able to get a copy of the conference report on the education pipeline of Latino students, and that's available for you at the back. Now today's conference is full. It's all day, and as I mentioned, in the evening we're going to have the screening of Walkouts, so stay with us for the entire day if you can. Now I want to introduce the director of the Chicano Studies Research Center here at UCLA, who will welcome you on behalf of the university and our research center, Professor Chon A. Noriega.
Thank you, Carlos, and good morning, and welcome to the day-long conference. This is a conference that has been a labor of love. Last spring, Carlos came to me with this idea, and immediately we jumped on it. It just seemed like the perfect way of launching this year an ongoing commitment to not just the research, but the public presentation and public debate over education. And Carlos mentioned a number of the conferences we've done. We've also done some pretty significant first-time ever conferences in the area of archival preservation, which kind of rounds out the picture of what we're trying to do in continuing the work of this center to produce the research, but also to have the resources there for the students and for scholars. When we met last spring with Sal Castro, this conference seemed like the ideal way to end a year in which we are bringing together all of the resources and faculty and students on this campus to look at education. Carlos mentioned the conference we did in April, Falling Through the Cracks, with Professor Danny Solorzano and Lindsay Huber Perez and other students involved in this. One of the nice things about that conference, and you'll see that again here today, is we're bringing faculty from around the country to come here and speak to this issue, and oftentimes there are former students. And we have a number of our former students who are now professors here participating in the conference, but also just attending the conference. And I think that's an important manifestation of the work of people like Danny to really bring attention to the pipeline, but also to manifest that. And a number of the faculty here and from the other campuses are an important example of that. All of that is to say, at the center, we've had this phrase that we use to kind of explain what we're doing, which is research that makes a difference. And it's important to acknowledge where that idea comes from. And I think in looking at the work of Sal Castro and the Chicano Youth Leadership Conference, this is where where this core idea begins to develop and take root here by the end of the 60s with the development of the Chicano Studies Research Center, and then develop further under the leadership of one of our first speakers, Professor Juan Gomez-Quinones. I was thinking about the importance of what Sal Castro has done and this idea of research that makes a difference, and that he exemplifies a related idea, that one person can make a difference, that one person can be a catalyst or initiate very profound change. And the development of leadership, the encouragement of students to go to college in order to play a leadership role in society and to bring about change, is perhaps more important now even than it was 40 years ago, because we are now the majority population. And yet the rate of access has not really kept pace with that. In fact, it really hasn't changed that much over the last 3 decades. So we're committed to continuing to bring attention to this. This is the second conference with a focus primarily on the issue of education. And we'll be continuing this next year with a conference in the spring as well on community colleges and the role that they play, particularly for Chicanos and Latinos. I'm not going to say much more because we have many more smarter people than I and more informed, and they'll be rounding out this picture. I'm referring to the scholars, but also to the participants in this program, in this important program. But I will say just one observation. As I was sitting here listening to Carlos, and I was looking there and seeing Mario Garcia and Rudy Acuña and Juan Gomez-Quinones, and I thought, you know, who else could bring together the foundational historians in Chicano history to talk about this? And the irony being, and I'm sorry guys, you have a lot to say, but the history ain't over yet. We're just beginning. We're at 43 years, and this is an ongoing program that really has an even more important role to play today, given the growth of the community. Now with that, I'm going to turn it over to our object of study, the man that we hope to really come to learn more about and understand in terms of the full range and impact of this program over 4 decades, or going on 5, in its 5th decade. Now I'm having my first senior moment here. With that, I'll turn it over to somebody who has much more energy and much more youthful than I, Sal Castro.
I'm humbled by the audience and folks on panels that are going to be here today. I mean, and what do I do? What do I do? Here we go. Maybe we're all right? Okay. Just looking at the list of folks that are going to be here is just fantastic. And I hope we can keep our eye on the ball. This is not about this old dude. It's about the Chicano Youth Leadership Conference that began as the Mexican American Youth Leadership Conference. So let me get started. Hail to the hills of Westwood. To the mighty sea below. It's always nice to come to the rancho of San Jose de Buenos Aires that was owned by Máximo Alañiz and Francisco Polanco way back in 1819, not 1919, but 1819. You can see all the ranchos there and all the Mexicanos here taking care of business as we were then. And it's always also nice to come to a state university where our Mexican forefathers who founded California in 1849 at Colton Hall in Monterrey, folks like Miguel de Pedroena from San Diego, Jose Carrillo from Los Angeles, Manuel Dominguez representing Los Angeles, Pablo de la Guerra from Santa Barbara, Jose Covarrubias from San Luis Obispo. These were some of the founding fathers of California, delegates to the Constitutional Convention of California when California became part of the United States in 1849, 1850. In fact, one of the first orders of business that these men proposed, there were 8 Mexicans out of the 33 folks that were participants at the Constitutional Convention. They should be just as famous as John Adams, but James Madison and Alexander Hamilton, the young Alexander Hamilton from New York, very handsome, and the old Benjamin Franklin that had held their convention a little earlier in Philadelphia, founding the federal government. But these men that I'm speaking about were the founders of California, mis hijos. And we should be very happy that we're here because their idea to have public universities, UCLA was one of their ideas. And I hope that someday we'll have some sketches and drawings of all these folks that helped found UCLA, including Máximo Alañiz and Francisco Polanco. As I mentioned before, we are going to speak about the Mexican American Youth Leadership Conference. Well, the idea began, actually, I guess, way back in the as Leonard Pitt said, way back in 1933, when there was a youth conference sponsored by the YMCA in San Pedro. Pitt talks about it, that it happened in 1934. And later in 1944, because of the so-called Zoot Suit riots, the Human Relation was formed of the county, the Human Relations Commission. And they attempted to deal with this problem, and still later in the early 1960s, all kinds of negative reports were coming out of different universities, how bad the school district was, how bad the Los Angeles school district was dealing with education. Does that ring a bell? I guess that's why we historians are still in business, huh? Because history repeats itself. A fellow by the name of Sheldon, professor out of Occidental College, wrote a scathing report on conditions in the schools. So bad that the LA City schools tried to get him fired out of Occidental College. Of course, that didn't happen. But still later, the reports from the FEPC out of Sacramento, the fact that Mexican kids were leading the nation in dropouts, gee whiz, and that Mexican kids weren't going to college, gee whiz. And so the Human Relations Commission attempted to do something about it through the benevolence and kindness of a man that owned Angelus Trouser Factory. And I see Al Juarez here. Did you tell me, Al, that your mother worked at the Angelus Pant Factory? Remember in Pasadena when we showed the movie Walkout, somebody said that they...
No, it wasn't my mom. She was at home raising me.
Oh, okay. It was somebody in that audience said, in the panel, said that their mother had worked at the Angelus Trouser Factory, and Tobias Katzen, the owner, being on the commission, said we should do something about it. Let's bring the kids together. Let's have a conference. Let's have a show. Let's have a conference. And so they picked Camp His Kramer because one of the members of the commission was the fellow that ran the conference center, Rabbi Wolf, and it was owned by the Wilshire Temple, the camp. And this was one of the first times that doors were open to Mexican kids to come and have a 3-day conference. Come back with me now. Let's roll back the time. Let's go back to the future. Listen to some of the things that were going on way back. The conferences first began, of course, in 1963. That was the very first conference that they had. They asked for volunteers to come and be part of the conference. I immediately, as a very young teacher, said, hey, I'd like to be involved. And so I did go to the county Hall of Administration office for meetings because they were going to have a conference. The person that was the big mover and shaker at the time of the conference was a fellow that was employed by the Human Relations Commission. His name was Art Almanza. So he actually should be given credit for beginning the conferences, and that was back again in 1963. They went on in 63, 4, 5, 6, and now let's move to 1967 because they were 3-dayers. This is what made them unique. Most of the conferences that some of the scholars here speak about, including Dr. Leonard Pitt out of, I think, is he still alive, Rudy? Leonard Pitt? Is he still teaching at Northridge? Oh, retired, okay, but he wrote a book, Los Angeles, one of his many books, and he talked about that conference in 34. Rudy Acuna in his book talked about also the conferences at Hess Kramer and prior to that. So did Dr. Juan Gomez Quinones in his book, Chicano Politics, spoke about the youth student conference. And also Carlos Munoz in his book, Youth Identity and Power, he spoke about the youth conference, the early youth conferences. And again, also the Chicano Youth Leadership Conference earlier was known as the Mexican American Youth Leadership Conference. And as I told you, come back with me to 1967. Cleet Roberts, a newsman, excellent newsman for Channel 2, CBS Channel 2, did a little mini documentary on the Mexican American Youth Leadership Conference of 1967. So return with us to hear the audio, a little bit of the audio portion of that program. In those days we were primitive. We couldn't record anything off of television, so we had to use, well, we couldn't record it directly. We used to have to use a microphone. And that's what I did, and I'm surprised that my sons, Gilbert, who's here right now, I'm surprised he wasn't around pulling wires then, because he was there when I recorded it. My other son, Jimmy, also, who's working. He's a working fool. He can never go anywhere because he's always working. Anyway, I'd like to play a little bit of the audio portion of that 1967 conference.
Now you can get rid of that gray in less time than it takes to set your hair.
You're kidding.
It's true. New VO5 hair color lotion covers gray in minutes without peroxide. Once it's on, gray's gone. Matches your natural color. Lasts a month or more. Now, covering gray takes less time than setting your hair. With new VO5 hair color lotion. The Dreyfus Fund is a mutual investment fund. Ask your securities dealer for a free prospectus. KNXT, Los Angeles.
Not all programs were color in those days.
The following is a Channel 2 color presentation.
Away from their usually drab surroundings, young Mexican Americans have gathered here to talk about important things. We are at Camp Hess Kramer in beautiful country north of Malibu. This is the site for the 5th Annual Mexican American Youth Leadership Conference, a 3-day meeting sponsored by the Los Angeles County Commission on Human Relations. The philanthropist who makes these meetings possible does not wish to be identified. All we are permitted to say is that he is not a Mexican American. About 200 boys and girls are attending this year's conference. They range in age from 14 to 19. Most are from Los Angeles County. A few come from other places in Southern California. There's quite a mix of young people here. The one thing they have in common is their Mexican background. Some of the girls and boys are from the middle class, but the majority are underprivileged. There are gang members and brilliant scholars. There are students who are having serious problems in school, while others are planning on a master's degree, possibly even a PhD. There is time for play and relaxation during the conference, but it is really a workshop. The purpose is to find out what is troubling the young Mexican Americans and what, if anything, they intend to do about it. At least one general session is held each day. But the most useful work takes place in small discussion groups. We shall be covering one of them in just a moment.
Again, welcome, and I hope I took you back to the future, and then we'll leave it up to the folks that know a lot more about everything. Thank you again for being here.
Sal will be speaking to us at the end of the conference today. That would be at around 4:30. And then we'll have the screening of the walkout film, the HBO film, at the Fowler Museum. That will be after we have a reception at 5:30 down there. And you'll be able to hear Sal again after the screening of the film. So you'll have an opportunity to listen to Sal 3 times today. This conference is bringing together many, many different people, but there is something in common. All of the panelists, all of the presenters have something in common, and that is that they are still connected in a very serious way with the Chicano Youth Leadership Conference, or they're connected in a very serious way with Sal Castro. Some of the panelists have been volunteer speakers at the Chicano Youth Leadership Conference for many, many years, and that includes the 2 historians that we have sitting at the front panel today. When Sal calls, you respond. And many of us go and talk to the high school students. We pay our own way. There's no such thing as an honorarium. We do it because Sal asks and because it's our commitment to our community. So when you listen to the speakers today, look at them not necessarily as scholars, which they are, but also in terms of their devotion and commitment to the community, the time that they serve. There are many that will speak today that are continuing to be volunteers for the Chicano Youth Leadership Conference series. They are implementing the conference today, 43 years later. So you'll meet some of them. In addition, you'll meet some of the alumni of the Chicano Youth Leadership Conference, people that have graduated from that program in past years. And in the program that you have, you'll see that a number of them are indeed alumni, and they talk about their experiences. It's important to reflect back on them because you have to wonder, well, where did the leadership come to produce something like the 1968 walkouts? Where did that leadership come from? Well, it came from, partly, the Chicano Youth Leadership Conference series. It also came from students interacting with Sal Castro and other teachers like him back in the 1960s era. So our first panel is going to be going to begin a little late, but we're going to be dealing with the historical significance of the Chicano Youth Leadership Conference series. I'm not going to go over the bios of the presenters or the panelists today. They're included in the program. But we have sitting up at the front here, Professor Rudy Acuna from Cal State University Northridge. Professor Juan Gomez Quinones from UCLA. And they will be joined by Professor Dolores Delgado Bernal. So if we can begin with Rudy, please.
Getting low, and I was speaking in a whisper. They told me I was speaking in a whisper. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? All right. I was told that I was speaking in a whisper. And I am, conscious when you get to be my age, you think you're getting deaf or something, and you can't hear anybody. Well, you can't. But the thing is that the friend that told me that was a person who's always insulting me. But he's from another place, Jose Angel Gutierrez from Texas. Jose is one of the, you see, it's always to the left. You're always to the left. You see, Jose is one of the people like Sal that's an inspiration that keeps on working. And one of the reasons I'm here is because Sal, just didn't let it go. Sal is a person who's always working. He's always contributing. But I'd like to explain before I start, why I'm wearing my glasses. And it's pretty much, the generation that Sal and myself come from. We used to wear those old Pachuco type glasses. Everybody used to wear glasses. And people ask me, how come you still wear the glasses? You don't need it in here. Well, in a way, they're my glasses, and the way I explain it, they're my fuck you glasses. Because in American society, they always want to know, they always want to see your face. They always want to see your eyes. Look at me straight in the eyes. I don't be shifty-eyed. Well, this way, when I wear my sunglasses, it tells you, screw you. And I think it's a polite way of doing it. And today I'm going to, because I heard Sal, then I looked at Juan's notes, and I don't want to repeat. And I think that we tend to repeat ourselves. We tend to overlap an awful lot. So today, really, I want to go into a little bit about Sal's generation. Because I think that, a person like Sal really appreciated the Camp Hess-Kramer tradition, the tradition of passing on something from one generation to the other. This was a little bit difficult with our generation, because our generation fell in between two generations. It fell in between the generation of the Julian Navas and the Ralph Guzmans, two people who are absolute gentlemen, who are very good people who contributed an awful lot. One is dead, Ralph Guzman, one of the nicest people I've ever met. Julian, one of the most generous people I've ever met. But here you had this generation that came in after the war, that what Mario T. called the GI generation. It was an awful lot different than my generation, which fell in between that generation and Juan's generation, Mario T's generation, which came a little bit later, which was more of the product of the 1960s, who many of them were just before the Camp Hess-Kramer. Our generation, which you could call almost the Pocho generation, where, we were victimized in school. We were told not to speak Spanish. We were told an awful lot of people were ashamed of being Mexican. An awful lot of alcoholism came out of that generation. But another thing that came out of that generation is that, you can look back and you can talk to Sal, you can talk to people like myself. There are not very many people from that generation that remained let's say, active. You didn't have that many people that remained active at that level. They came from that generation just before. It's a generation that said, you know, I want to make it in the society. I want to leave the barrio. I want to get out of it. And so consequently, when you see a person like Sal come back, and I knew an awful lot of people from Cathedral High School, where he came from. I went to the nerd school. I went to Loyola High School. And you found very few people coming out of those schools that remained active. I only know probably out of my whole class, maybe 2 people, you see. You just had that thing that you were going to make it. Well, you got into things then, you got into the movement, usually because of that, what my grandfather used to call amor propio. You got into it because you wanted to do something. You got tired of feeling ashamed of who you were, of people talking about your people in pejorative ways, of when I was a kid, not being a dirty Mexican meant that they had to scrub your elbows in with Ajax. You see because your elbows always looked dirty. It was a different generation. Los Angeles was a different city. In many ways, it was a very nice city. It was a city where you could take a streetcar any place that you wanted, you see. I remember going through in Loyola High School, because Conady used to be real close, where we used to wait until the girls' school let out so we could get on the streetcar with them. You know, you could be next to a girl because you went to an all-boys school. You see, that was just a different generation there. You had a generation where you could go downtown. They had a downtown, you see. You could meet people in the downtown area. You could go down to Venice, and at that time Venice was all white. You could go and get in a fight. You see, it was a different generation, but it was a generation that really never didn't identify with white. You didn't identify with a certain community. That was taken up with the CSO crowd. And the CSO crowd was dominated by the crowd before, that generation before. The Henry Navas, the Julian Navas, these people. And you tend to go in cliques. Now, when the 60s came up, the 60s almost opened up this. It almost starts to open it up with things like the Viva Kennedy is very important, because it does bring in a lot of what? Of my generation, Sal's generation into it, because it was a thing that was very important because you could be part of it. And politics, you have to, there's a certain seduction with politics, because politics, you see it as a way of going up. Everybody envisions himself as a what? As a politician. In my generation, I was so light that you were a crossover candidate, you see, and you could be a crossover candidate because they could see you and they really wouldn't know. You just drop the N and you go kuna, and the thing is, or acne or something like that, you see. But the thing is that when you had then, and the uniqueness about a Sal is that a Sal feels something. Sal is probably one of the most feeling people that I know. He's a crybaby. You look at the film, he's crying. But he's one of the people that I know that's almost a true nationalist, in the good sense. One time we went camping with him, and my wife said, well, you have any political songs? And that, political songs to her was the Nueva Canción. And he said, no, the most political thing that we get here is Valentín de la Sierra. You see, and the thing is that he feels it. He feels that, being a Mexican. He feels that link. And he's one of the few people who did not really benefit from the movement at all, you see. He kept on teaching high school. And it wasn't the first time, with Hess Kramer, it was not the first time he got into trouble. The trouble he got into the first time was in 1964, when he was at Belmont High School, And he saw that at Belmont High School, the majority of the students were of Mexican extraction. They had 4 limited English-speaking students, 400, and none of the people in the student government were Mexican extraction. The president, the officers of the student government weren't Mexicans. So he used to be a playground director, and so he told them, he said, you know, he got a couple of students together, and he says, why don't you go before the students and speak a couple of words in Spanish like Kennedy did in Overa Street. Remember when Overa Street, when Kennedy came out and said hola, and half the Mexicans there had mental orgasms, and you had that thing. So he told them to do that, and he formed a group called what? The TMs, the Tortilla Movement. And so you had then these groups, they went over there and they spoke, and they took most of the offices. Well, the administration found out about it, and they said he was stirring up racial hatreds. And they got rid of him by sending him over to Lincoln High School, because at Lincoln High School, he wasn't gonna be a problem. And so he was at Lincoln High School. Well, he started to become what? Sensitized to it. He had a pretty good deal there because Sal loved sports, you see, and he liked getting free football tickets and going to different games. But, you know, one of the places that people like myself got politicized, and I know Sal got politicized, was in the teachers' smoking rooms, because they used to have smoking rooms for teachers. And when you were there and you're listening to the other teachers talk about Mexican students, I started my career at a place called San Fernando Junior High School. And I started teaching there back in 1958. And I remember the other teachers talking about the little bastards. And when I realized that the little bastards was me, you know, I started putting together, and I wasn't stupid. And you start to get angry. You start to get angry with the little remarks, you know, the book that I wrote, Anything But Mexican. When they turn around to you after they say some really shitty things about Mexicans, it's, yeah, but you're different. What's different about me, my nalgas? You know, you start to look at that and you start to get angry. So you start to get angry with society. You can be angry and be self-destructive, or you can be like Sal. Channel it into something that is positive. You see, be a role model for children. And this is when you start with, you know, with Camp Hess-Kramer, it's very important because you are politicizing a whole, generation of people. Because, you know, your 7th graders are going to be high school students, and some of your high school students are later going to be college students. They're going to join groups like UMAS, United Mexican American Students. They're going to go into these things. There's a link there. So you start to look at the Camp Hess-Kramer, the County Human Relations. You start to look at things like the war on poverty, because it's very important, because they raise expectations. You start teen posts, and all of a sudden they don't have enough funding because of the Vietnam War. So what do? You get angry. You have to get angry about something, you see. And, you know, the basis of all movements is being pissed off. You see, it's being pissed off. You have to be angry about something. You have to sustain it. That's the difficulty of sustaining a movement, is that it's hard to keep people always pissed off, you see. And you have to do it. This is the role of ideology, you see, because you keep on showing, you know, differences there. You know, Sal is not an ideological person. But, you know, I'll go along with Sal more than most ideological people, because he feels it. He has it in his gut. He knows what is right and wrong. He ain't no postmodernist. He knows what is what is right and wrong. And there is a right and wrong. And this is, you know, just to kind of close it. This generation, you start to look at the generation that middle generation. And where did they come from? Most of us came from Catholic schools. And though I am today an atheist, I have to concede that Catholic schools formed an awful lot of my what? An awful lot of my concepts of right and wrong, and there is a right and wrong. It's not relative in the society. I think that sometimes people define that right and that wrong in a wrong fashion, you see. But you can start going back to Descartes, and when he's talking about the wax, you see. And you have to look at your senses. You have to be educated. But there are some people that are more educated than others. And this is Sal. Thank you very much.
In a statement that was attributed to me in '68, I allegedly said that in the community, Sal Castro was a highly considered person. I must have been thinking in Spanish, and I hope I don't always speak that awkwardly. But what I meant by that was that Sal is a person that embodies a very old, a very ancient judging standard. Whether you are a person of love and generosity, or whether you're a person of selfishness and invidiousness, the respect that Sal so deservedly has maintained amongst us for now more than 40 years is because of his commitment to that very ancient indigenous morality of being generous, of being altruistic, and that ultimately the purpose in life, the worthwhile purpose in life, is service to others. And it is as service to others that individuals may gain merit, and at the end of their life indeed be able to hear La Llorona calling them forth to ride across the skies following the sun. Because in contradistinction to the distortions that are sometimes made as to when you do hear the Llorona, it is only those that are strong of heart and pure of mind that can actually hear the call of La Llorona, that is in fact a call to rallying the people, and Sal certainly did that. We, of course, would not be Mexicanos and Chicanos if we only indulged in celebratory discussion. And everybody in this room knows that these are not necessarily celebratory times. But if you will, allow me a little bit of celebration in regards to recognition amongst the many people here, all of you who deserve recognition. The recognition to Jose Angel Gutierrez has been made, and it is so deserved. But I see individuals here that, at least in this part of the mosaic that was the Chicano movement, were particularly important in events related to what we're talking about here mostly, and that would be Luis Ortiz Franco and Al Juarez, one who was always the serious one, and as you could tell from just moments ago, Al, who took some things very seriously, never took himself or us seriously, so he always has something funny to say. I know that Susan Racho and Becky Sandoval, they're not here yet and I can't see them, but I know they will be here later on. I prepared in ways that I did not expect because of circumstances that surround us, and I might share some of these preparations. One was the fact that the other night I attended the reading of senior thesis by students working under Miley Blackwell. One student. Yes, indeed. On more than one count, too. And the jury is still out, right? But he's talking to the judge under the table. These students that worked under Professor Miley Blackwell are very much students of today. But of course, they also, since almost any study that you do on our community, by the very seconds that that elapse as one point them out and maybe articulate them, become history. Studies are history. And one of the students worked on the founding of the Comisión Femenil. And the other student began working on the empowerment of Mexicana, Latina women in the farm laboring sector. This student, and I'm hoping not to distort her words, came across something that maybe at first she had not fully gauged as a part of her study, and that was the presence of indigena women now in very large numbers in the Central Valley. I think part of the study was in and around Modesto or Madera, and how it is that indigenous women are different, unique, and on the other hand, share some of the travails that all women do vis-a-vis patriarchy and gender and sex discrimination, but they suffer them more. The other student, studying Comisión Femenil as a founding organization in the that part of the mosaic of the Chicano movement that I referred to just a while ago, came across the fact that you had women who were quite young in those steps that occurred in 1970. Amongst them that I can remember from the list that she circulated would have been a very young Gloria Molina, a little bit older but still quite young Yolanda Nava, and so forth. But what struck me was that there were women like Lillian Aceves or Evelyn Velarde Benson, Connie Munoz, all names that I'm sure some of you would recall, and I know surely that Sal and Rudy know them. And the point was that the student was rightfully looking at what was assumed to be a unique event, unique in its momentness, that is the founding of a significant feminist organization as part of the organizing going on amongst the movement in general. And what she ran into was the fact that there were some very significant movement predecessors, women who had been active actually for anywhere from 20 to maybe even more than that, and at least that I could read, I'm sure there must have been others, were of a left background. Certainly somebody like Velarde Benson, regardless of what her city hall politics were in the 60s, goes back to a very honorable left family, right, going to the roots of the Magonistas and the Wobblies and the IWW, and of course Connie Munoz was extremely active in leftist circles, as I believe Lillian Aceves was, and of course as I was reminded by the other pair here, Francisca Flores. So why am I bringing this up? Because I really would like us to consider, while we are talking about the events of the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, it is important to indicate that in one very key aspect of the Chicano Youth Leadership Conference effort is an effort that's been going on for some 40 years. And it is one more testimony to a virtue that sometimes we don't sufficiently recognize amongst ourselves, is that we can indeed be tenacious, and that tenacity can be one of our outstanding strengths vis-a-vis whatever opponents we might have. We eventually outlast them. We have a Chicana and Chicano Studies department at UCLA today, while on the other hand, Chuck Young has gone elsewhere for his recuperation, as one small example, which I couldn't resist. But the fact is that the Camp Hess-Kramer experience is a good chunk of modern and nearly postmodern chronology within our community here, and I want to come back to that. We not only have the virtue of tenacity, but we do every once in a while aspire to the virtue of being able to be blunt and frank amongst ourselves as part of a diagnostic, right? By the way, a practice of self-criticism and even speaking in bitterness that also has indigenous roots. That is, you do sit around and discuss how things could be better and how a different world could be brought about. And I think Sal and the many people who participated with him over the years were in fact doing that. If not always articulating ideology, certainly practicing it. Part of the preparation that befell me in this was things or events or processes that have befallen all of you. And that, one, we're living in a moment of crisis, and I don't have to spell that out. And very tellingly, after what some people who are optimistic and wishing and certainly well-meaning would like years of progress, especially from the 60s to the present. And maybe if we're talking about alumni, if we're talking about people who have successful careers, who have achieved and so forth, in some measure, those achievements are the specifics of this linear progress that might be pointed out. But the events of today also recall something very, very different. And that is that, in fact, Mexicans are once again the favorite sport of the hate mongers, of those that want to push not only us back, but as a matter of fact, the whole country back. You cannot overlook the fact that no matter how the language, the terminology, the words are veiled, they are in fact talking about Mexicanos in very, very negative terms. And we even have a national TV program that for 2 hours on a consistent basis broadcasts all the worst fears, tremors, stereotypes that the people of the 50s and 60s suffered, only now on a grander scale. What anti-Mexicano of the 50s and 60s could match the verb and strikingness of a Lou Dobbs on Fox channel on a regular basis, aided by both audio equipment as well as visual equipment, all broadcasting that message that Professor Rudy Acuna referred to as amongst those circumstances, those contexts that made people angry, and amongst those motivating forces that drove Sal to do what he has so consistently done. One of the things that he always talks about, Sal, is that you do things, whatever you do, that you do them for your people, but that you also do them in dignity and with dignity. A very clear, simple, and strengthening call. Again, when you see the people marching in the streets today, and when they talk about dignidad, you know exactly what they're talking about. Because they are, in fact, rejecting and negating the sort of message that is so consistently broadcast by the Lou Dobbs and acted upon by the Minutemen, but very importantly, by a very strong majority, Republican majority, and nothing less than the House of Representatives. Taking along those lines, we know that we have only been in the preliminaries of this national debate that is in fact a national debate about us, but also obviously a national debate about what kind of country, what kind of society do we want. Do we want one that's whole, that's integral, that is committed to a positive future, or do we want one that is divisive, invidious, suspicious, hate-mongering, and reactionary? And we're going to see how, in fact, the American public is going to vote on that, whether it's through machines or whether it's through voicing their opinions with their friends and family. Are they going to be committed to a United States that is indeed better than it has been in the past? Or is it going to be a United States that, driven by fear and lack of confidence, can't think of anything better to do than bomb people abroad and to persecute people at home? Youth have been at the center of the experiences indicating responses on the part of the Mexicano, Latino, and progressive people in general. And I can't help but think of the fact that we would all be so much better served, and we are better served up to a point, if all of